Today, we're going to continue to explore how God's heavenly ways of transformation are revealed through his entire creation and creative process. We cannot grow into the mature sons and daughters of God that God has ordained for us to be apart from us undergoing this radical change and transformation by the power of the Holy Spirit. Welcome to Friend Go Up Higher, a weekly podcast that explores the mystery and grace of praying in tongues for personal edification. Okay, so then the next one I took a look at, and that is the tadpole. Okay, so this reminded me of childhood because, like I remember growing up, I lived by a swampy area, and so we saw tadpoles and caught frogs and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that was remarkable or interesting to me about the metamorphosis of the tadpole is that the signals in the tadpole's body actually order certain cells of the body to die. Okay, so there's certain things that the tadpole, registers and processes through the wisdom and intelligence of God that's built into it. And it knows what things it no longer needs. So there's certain things that says, I no longer need this thing, and I'm commanding those cells to die. And that is so much like what we go through in transformation. God builds us up into truth through edification and praying in tongues. And we find that there are mentalities and mindsets that we no longer have a use for. There are things in our life that we let go of and we command them to die because we know that they are no longer part of this new life that God has led us into. So the other thing that's interesting is that those dead cells that the tadpole commands to die, such as its tail, for example, they provide the energy and the raw materials that it actually needs in order to make new cells. So as God transforms us, and we find certain things in our minds, in our hearts, in our lives that we no longer need, and it's time for those things to die, that frees us up with newfound energy in the spirit to be able to tackle some of the things that God is leading us into. So, as I mentioned, the tails with the tadpole, the tail breaks down, and in its place, the frog's legs are developed. Another example, remember the tadpole swims in the water, so its gills disappear and it develops lungs. So it goes from not, just complete bodily changes, but also complete lifestyle changes too. So think about a tadpole lives in water, it's breathing underwater, and it's eating like insects and algae and plants and things like that. But when it turns into a frog lives on land. It might sometimes live on lily pads and so forth. It breathes air through its lungs and it eats insects. So it's like everything about the body and how it lives have changed. So these are really, I just think they're fascinating. These are fascinating parallels with what happens between this metamorphoo that be transformed by the renewing of your mind, this spiritual transformation, and God's process of metamorphosis that he created in his creation. So, metamorphosis, some of the parallels, for example, metamorphosis is triggered by certain messengers, which we call hormones. And likewise, that metamorphosis in us is triggered by messengers, the messenger, the Holy Spirit, and the words that he is praying into our spirit. That truth and that call that he's praying into us triggers this metamorphosis. Metamorphosis involves changes to the animal's body, its food supply, and its lifestyle. That's completely like us. When God changes us, our spiritual body, sometimes even honestly who we hang out with, The company that we keep changes. The food that we eat, our hunger for the word or the things of the spirit versus the appetites of the flesh or the appetites of the world. And then, of course, our lifestyle, completely changes when God transforms us. And then the other thing that also was pretty cool to me is that, do you know an animal such as these cannot grow into maturity and adulthood apart from this process of metamorphosis? And so that's a lot like us. We cannot grow into the mature sons and daughters of God that God has ordained for us to be apart from us undergoing this radical change and transformation by the power of the Holy Spirit. All right, we cannot, animals can't reproduce. So an animal, unless it goes through transformation like this metamorphosis, it's unable to have mature body parts. It's unable to reproduce itself. And so likewise in the spirit, we are unable to reproduce ourselves. It only comes by the power of the Spirit. And so, I had found when I was just reading a bunch of different things, reading the Word and reading some different things, and I found this statement that I really loved. And this was the Holy Spirit speaking. And he said, creation, and this was like a prophetic utterance, okay? Creation is the heavenly model for all transformation. Creation is the heavenly model for all transformation. And so that's why we're taking a look at this, just like we looked at Romans chapter 1, I think it was verse 20, that, how God does things, his wisdom, his attributes are clearly seen in his creation. And so after seeing these parallels, I think it's pretty difficult to deny that true transformation, the way the Bible is talking about it, it is spectacular. It is miraculous. And it's produced only by the power of the Holy Spirit with whom we partner. This is not a natural process, even though we are involved. But the execution of it is completely done by the Holy Spirit. So what I want you to take away and just to mull through this week is that parallel between us praying in tongues and edifying our spirits, all of the diversity of things that God does through that teaching ministry, and to remember that true transformation is this radical, miraculous thing that God does inside of us. And it creates this mind renewal, but it always involves the power of the Holy Spirit. And he's miraculous. So think about that, and we'll talk about this some more next week. Luke 14:10 says this, "But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, go up higher.' Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you." When we step aside and go lower with Jesus, letting him pray in tongues through us, he exalts us to walk in everything that he purchased for us.